Is this thing on? I'll be continuing the motivation series. And this one, it's going to be a little bit different in that it's going to also sort of blend sort of religious concepts and tie it to what are the underlying motivations behind those concepts. Um, it's the Cardinal Sins, or commonly referred to as the seven deadly sins. These are sort of behaviors that we adopt out of different motivations, and oftentimes they're pleasurable motivations, but over in the long run do us harm. Are often lead to decisions that do not help us, both sort of socially, economically, what have you. So the seven deadly sins, you got lust, envy, sloth, gluttony, greed, wrath, and pride. Um, and these sins, these sort of behaviors, these motivations, can cause pain and suffering to others and ourselves. And so it is often good to avoid or confront these behaviors, these sins. So I'll start with each of them and then sort of talk about what are the underlying motivations. The lust one is probably just going to be the easiest one. It's the one I've been talking about so much with the desire series. Lust is sort of sexual desire to the point of not actually valuing actual interaction, not actually valuing actual relationships, not actually valuing being there for people when they're not in a desirable mood. They're not in a desirable state. When you're lusting for someone, you're just wanting that short-term sexual fix and then often discarding them. And it leads to devalued relationships. And the thing is that in terms of the cardinal sins, we all experience lust. It's just how we manage our lust is sort of what determines whether or not it can become sort of an addictive behavior, or how we manage that motivation, how it impacts our interpersonal relationships. If we can deny our lust, it can often lead to real development of proactive, practical relationships. And then you could potentially find what love actually is. But yeah, lust, an interesting thing about lust is there's a pleasure element to it. And most of these sins do have some form of pleasure element, things that make us feel good. But then things that make us feel good can end up going too far and cause either pain and suffering to ourselves or others. So we take care of lust. Envy. So envy is jealousy, and it can be sexual jealousy, but it could also be material jealousy. And I think if we just define envy as jealousy as a whole, then often it's more hurting ourselves, this form of motivation. But then it can lead to behaviors that also harm others, because then you're sort of putting whatever gets you ahead. But then there's a lot of sort of overlapping between envy and greed, often going hand in hand. People usually don't get greedy if they're not envious first. Occasionally they do. Occasionally people just want things not for trying to impress other people, but for themselves. The thing is that if other people's thoughts and actions and sort of perceptions don't truly matter, then often at the end of the day, you can never truly experience greed to the point of sort of what sort of billionaires experience, what trillionaires experience. You can never really get there if you don't care what other people think. It's you have to care about what other people think in order to sort of have that sort of goal. And then so envy is what feeds greed, and then greed is just acquiring and using so much material beyond what is necessary. And you could say that we live in a relatively pretty greedy world. Now, the world has always been greedy. Eras of feudalism definitely had significant elements of greed among the powerful. So greed has been part of the human existence for a long time, but this form of motivation, often driven by envy, but not always, is about acquiring material beyond what is necessary for your own survival, acquiring material beyond what is necessary for sort of multiple generations of your family to continue. Now, part of what motivates greed too is sort of a legacy piece, wanting generational wealth to ensure that your genes propagate into the next generation. That's sort of the evolutionary element in this circumstance. So we've covered lust, we've covered envy, and we've covered greed. And then we got sloth and gluttony, which are sort of separate. Sloth is sort of how we call laziness, and sort of interestingly, it's hard to conceptualize what counts as sloth. Are we a more lazy culture than previous generations that worked like up to 16 hours a day? That's a question. Some people say it's more healthy to have some a work-life balance, but sort of what is the balance, and then what about people who lack social skills or lack cognitive skills to work? So, and this question is not an easy answer, not an easy fix. But what motivates sloth? What motivates not wanting to work, not wanting to contribute to other people, not wanting to build communities, and then in a religious context, not wanting to honor God in whatever form you believe God exists. What is the motivation here? Often comes down to either our perceptions of our own physical capabilities, our perceptions of our cognitive, social, etc. And I think that sloth as a sin, it's really when you're turning down opportunities to honor others, to serve others significantly, like if repeated attempts, but serving within your capacity is always good. So sloth is one of the tightest ones, difficult ones to sort of define in the modern era. And then you have gluttony, and you could say our world is more gluttonous than ever in terms of our food production. We have a large food production, the largest food production in world history. We've really reduced starvation in the last 30 years. And I think overeating is becoming more of a problem, but it's primarily due to sort of the existence of foods that, like, generations, 5 generations, 6 generations before us would have never eaten. So we're talking 19th century foods are far less sweet, far less fattening than the foods that we have today, and sort of the human mind has to adjust to that. So we got lust, we've got envy, greed, sloth, and gluttony, and then the last two deal to me with the ego, which is wrath and pride. So wrath is sort of when you've been so emotionally harmed that you seek revenge, that you seek to be judge, jury, and executioner. What sort of delineates this from justice is you sort of bridge those into different social systems. Judge is something, a specific social role, jury is a specific social role, and the sort of execution, sort of implementation of how the justice is served, separate social. If it's one person, singular, and that's when you're dealing with revenge, you're dealing with wrath, and that is only for God, if you believe in God. Otherwise, it's for no one. No one is meant to be judge, jury, and executioner and seeking revenge. And then pride is sort of the flip side, where your ego hasn't been damaged, but you're building it up to the point where you view others as beneath you. That you're no longer worthy serving others. So the motivation there is doing what best serves you, and not anybody else. So what I'm doing here is I'm sort of bridging what the cardinal sins mean for motivation. What fuels people to behave in such ways. And what's interesting, and evolutionary psychologists talk about this, is often it is out of pleasure. I would say wrath is the only one that's not always out of pleasure that these behaviors occur. So things that we think are fun, things that we think will serve us and make us happy, are also the things that can cause pain and suffering both to ourselves and others. So, what's the overall answer to the cardinal sins and motivation? It is be aware of what fuels you. What is your purpose in life? Be aware of it. Anyways, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time, and I will see you in the next one.